Hi, welcome to iEducator. This is Teacher Jeff. I'm an educator and an engineer by profession. And today we will discuss Chapter 7. And Chapter 7 is all about design cost and management accounting system. And in today's lesson, there are a couple key areas that I'm going to be highlighting to you today. First, we have the introduction. Second, we have the similarities and differences of systems design. Third, we will be talking about the job order cost accounting design. Fourth, we have the process cost accounting system. Fifth, we have the product flow. Sixth, we have part one, quantity schedule with no production loss. We also have equivalent units. And finally, we have part two, increases in the number of units due to addition of materials. Now, whenever a customer's eyes grow large and bright just by seeing the selection of foods in the counter of Dad's World Buffet, consumers are not thinking of the cost and the various processes these foods went through before being offered in an all-you-can-eat environment. But the accountants of this store, this process is a critical task. It is important that they will be able to give the managers the relevant costs associated with their decision making in coming up with certain price strategy that is acceptable to consumers as well as to the stockholders of the company. So what is meant by cost then? If we say cost, this refers to the money or resources sacrificed, forgone, or paid by a business enterprise to achieve a specific objective. Now, in order for us to better understand this, let us have an example. A company purchased a computer for 50,000 pesos. And in this case, 50,000 pesos is our cost. Okay, since this is our purchase price. Now, we will be discussing what the similarities and differences of systems and design are. Now, let us discuss first two types of systems design. So in this case, we have two types. First, we have job order costing, and second, we have process costing. Now, what are the differences between the two? Now, if we say job order costing design, actually measures the product cost by accumulating cost per job order. And second, the cost accumulation is done through the job cost sheet. And finally, this system design is intended for heterogeneous products. If we say heterogeneous products, these are the products that have different characteristics, different attributes as well, okay? On the other hand, if we say process costing design, it measures the product cost by accumulating cost per department where the product is processed. Second, the cost accumulation is done through the preparation of a production report. And finally, this system design is intended for homogeneous products or those which have similar characteristics and attributes. And the similarities of both, first, both of these system designs are 3-unit subjects and a prerequisite subject of managerial accounting. Second, both systems will enhance further the managerial skills. And finally, these two systems prepare the cost of goods manufactured and sold. And the second key area that we're going to be discussing right now, that would be the job order cost accounting design. So we will be digging deeper in regards to what really job order cost accounting is. Now, if we say job order cost system, it is actually a design using the job cost sheet to document the cost accumulation for managerial accounting purposes. And please take note as well that this will not replace the recording aspect to accumulate costs for financial accounting. And the job cost sheet is a document or office form used by the manufacturing company to summarize the cost accumulated by a specific job order. An ideal job order cost sheet must contain the following information. First, there should be a heading that must be the name of the company. So in the heading corner, there should be the name of the company reflecting to it. Second, there should be the control number or the serial number. This is very important so that a missing job order sheet can easily be checked or traced. And second, there should be a name of the customer, the address, the details of the job to be done, the contract price, the delivery deadline, expected dates of finishing the order, expected cost of the order, delivery instruction, and other information that pertains to the customer. And number four, the cost area charges such as the direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead as well. These charges, take note, should contain the date, the source of the charges, and the specific documents and the amount of the charges. And number five, it should contain the summary of all these charges. And finally, the last part is the responsible persons for this specific job, who signs in the prepared by, checked by, and approved by. Now, this is an example of a job cost sheet, okay? As you can see on the heading section, you can see there the name of the company. So the name of our company is reflecting there. So in this case, we have Grand Lake Cast Manufacturing Company, and followed by the name of the sheet, which is, in this case, we have job cost sheet. And you also have the control number. As you can see, the control number is located in the right corner of the upper right corner rather of the sheet. So you have there job order number, and you also can see the name of the customer, the address, the details of the job to be done, the contract price, and so on and so forth, okay? And beneath that, you can also see there the cost area charges such as the direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. So these charges should contain the date, the sources of the charges, and the specific documents and the amount of the charges. And also, as you can notice, we can also see there the summary of all these charges. And lastly, you can also see there the last part is the responsible persons, or those who signs the prepared by, checked by, and approved by. And next, we will be discussing the different documents associated with job order costs. Remember, job order accounting is unique since the accumulation of costs is being monitored using this form. Now, as the cost is entered in and incurred, proper documentation must be made so that accounting department can properly record it in the books of accounts as well as in the job cost sheet. All job orders must be associated with a specific job. And take note as well that this will serve as the subsidiary ledger for the work in process account. And the work in process accounts are direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. The job cost sheet will certainly evaluate factory efficiency, and the projected cost can easily be compared with the actual cost, and therefore, the manager can easily detect the cause of such inefficiency. The manager can also see the delivery schedule, such as the contract delivery date, the actual date of delivery, and the difference can also be well evaluated so that factory performance can be made. And next, we have the documents associated with the job order cost. Now, some of the documents that are associated with a job order cost, we have the material requisition slip, we have the warehouse issue slip, we have the material return slip, the time ticket, and the time card. Now, in order for us to better understand each of them, let us discuss them one by one, starting with material requisition slip, or MRS. Now, if we say material requisition slip, it is a slip used by the production department to request materials they need to complete a manufacturing process. It is also used to authorize and keep a record of the components used so that an appropriate inventory can be stocked to keep production moving. Now, every time there is a need to use materials in the factory, whether direct or indirect materials, the factory personnel must fill out a request form addressed to the warehouse man. And the warehouse man is not allowed to release any materials from the warehouse without the request form coming from the factory or work area. This is done to avoid losses due to unnecessary releases of materials. And there should not be any verbal communication to the release of any materials to be charged to a specific job order, since the finance department requires documentation for all transactions. This is an application of the accounting concept of objectivity, if you can recall, which we discussed in the previous chapters. And factory supervisors are also monitoring all its costs in order to comply with the standard materials to be used in the job order. An example of this form, this will be this one. Okay, so as you can see, this is an example of a material requisition slip. But also, you need to take note that one may also design his or her own form to fit his or her needs. Now, remember, it is a basic requirement that all information in the material requisition slip must be filled out, as this will show the persons responsible for each request. And aside from this slip, we also have the warehouse issue slip, or the WIS. If we say warehouse issue slip, it is a form used in the warehouse as a document to support the material issuance of the warehouse man. And the warehouse issue slip is supported by the warehouse requisition slip. This is very important, especially on highly technical parts of the raw materials, wherein the part number is very vital. The warehouse issue slip is being posted daily in the job cost sheet so that the factory supervisor will be aware of the progress of the job and the cost associated with it. An example of this office form is this one. Okay, so as you can see, this is an example of a material issuance slip. All right. So the next slip that we will be talking about, that would be material return slip, or the MRS. If we say MRS, or material return slip, it is the form used every time the factory will return materials, whether direct or indirect materials. Now, the possible reasons for these returns are, first, it may be because there are excess materials due to change in customer specifications, or it can be because of wrong technical description of the item or items. Also, it may be because the materials are not within the standard specification of the customer. And finally, it may be because the material itself is defective. Now, for costing purposes, it is necessary to attach a copy of warehouse issue slip where the returns come from. So this is an example of a material return slip. We also have what we call time ticket. If we say time ticket, this form will show how the time of the workers is being spent, and this will serve as a basis for the direct labor charges, and for some, a basis for the factory overhead charges. And this is an example of a time ticket. Now, the charges will be posted daily in the job cost sheet so that the factory supervisor is aware of the progress of the job and the cost associated with it. And with this system, timely decisions can be made. And finally, the last document associated with job order cost is what we call time card. If we say time card, normally employees will punch in when coming to the workplace and punch out when leaving the workplace using the company's Bundy clock. Now, this will serve as a document for the payment of the salaries of the factory workers. Now, the various documents and office forms that control all the transactions entered into the job cost sheet has made the job order cost accounting system challenging for everyone that works in the company. For managers who are involved in the decision-making process, the job cost sheet gives comprehensive information that is helpful in analyzing what happened when the job was in process. So the job cost sheet also gives information on the profitability of the job, which is very essential on the part of the company, aside from the quality of job for the customer to appreciate, right? So the next key area that we're gonna be discussing right now, that would be the process cost accounting system. Now, to understand the process cost accounting better, it is necessary for the learners to understand first the underlying operational process system. So what is meant by underlying operational process systems? If we say underlying operational process system, it means that a large number of homogeneous products pass through a series of processes, where each process is responsible for one or more operations that will bring a product a step closer to its completion until the product is fully completed. A process, therefore, is a series of activities that are linked to perform a specific objective. In order for us to better understand this, we will present a specific example about underlying operational process system in the next key area. And the next key area that we're gonna be discussing right now, that would be product flow. And if we say product flow, a product in a process cost system can move in various ways. There are actually 3 product formats associated with the system, and these are sequential product flow, parallel product flow, and we also have selective product flow. Now, as you can see, in order for us to better understand each of these product formats, let us discuss first sequential product flow. And if this is sequential product flow, it indicates that only the homogeneous products will be moved from one department to another department. Now, as you can see in figure 7.7, this is an example of product flow or production flow. As you can see, the picking department will forward the product to the cutting department after picking, loading, and selecting it. It is the cutting department where the product will be cut, loaded, and sealed. Now, the moment the product is finished in the cutting department, this will be forwarded to the packaging department for sorting, loading, and forwarding, and then to the finished goods warehouse. Unless the product is already finished, as far as each specific department is concerned, it will not be forwarded to the next department, and this must be sequentially done. This means that after picking, the product will be forwarded to cutting and then forwarded to packing or packaging department until the finished goods are forwarded to the warehouse. And the next product format that we're gonna be discussing, that would be parallel product flow. Now, if we say parallel product flow, under this product flow, several components of the products will be simultaneously processed. At a certain point, the production process will be merged. Now, as you can see, this is an example of parallel product flow. In a parallel product flow, certain portion of the work are actually done simultaneously and then brought together in a final process or processes for completion and transfer to finished goods inventory. Now, if we will try to determine the processes that are done simultaneously. So you have there work in process cutting department and work in process melting department. So they are actually doing simultaneously or working simultaneously. And work in process cutting department is being forwarded to work in process planning and sanding department. And also, on the other hand, the work in process melting department is being forwarded to work in process casting department. And after these processes, they are both being merged to work in process assembly department and finally to the finished goods. So this is what we call parallel product flow. And finally, the last product format that we have is what we call selective product flow. And under this product flow, the product moves to different departments within the plant depending upon the desired final product. Now, as you can see, this is an example of selective product flow. Aside from different product formats, we also have what we call methods of costing as used in process cost system. So there are actually two methods of costing that are being used in process cost system. First, we have the FIFO method, or commonly known as first in, first out method. And secondly, we have what we call the average method. Now, if we say FIFO method, this is based on the premise that the units which are placed first in the process will be the first ones to be completed. So those that are first completed are the first transferred out. Normally, FIFO method or first in, first out basis or method is usually applicable to those companies or manufacturing companies or businesses that are into food manufacturing. And second, we have what we call average method. And if we say average method, this means that department costs like the initial work in process inventory and other costs added in the department are being merged. And aside from this, we also have two methods in the application of the elements of cost to the product's process, and these are the even methods and the uneven method. Now, in order for us to better understand this, let us discuss first the even method. If we say even method, this means that the cost of materials, labor, and factory overhead are evenly applied to the products being processed. On the other hand, if we say uneven method, this means that the application of the cost of the products varies at any stage of the process. For example, the materials can be introduced at the start, middle, end, or a certain percentage of the production. Now, in job order cost accounting system, the job cost sheet is used as a tool to accumulate the cost of a certain product. Now, the cost of materials, labor, and factory overhead used in the product are all listed and accumulated in the job cost sheet. However, under the process cost system of accumulating costs, the cost of production report will be used. Now, the cost of production report has the following parts. First, we have quantity schedule, and second, we have cost schedule. So in this case, we will be discussing our next key area or part one, which is quantity schedule with no production loss. So we will discuss first quantity schedule. Now, the first part of the cost of production report will focus on the preparation of its quantity schedule with an assumption that there will be no production loss, whether normal or abnormal. Now, this quantity schedule is composed of the following. First, the units to be accounted for. Second, the units as accounted for. And finally, the computation of the equivalent units. Now, in order for us to better understand these, this will be best understood if we provide an example. So let's have an example. So first, let us talk about the units to be accounted for. Now, the units to be accounted for at its initial month and its initial department is shown in our presentation. So as you can see, the total units to be accounted for, you have there started in process amounting to 20,000, and the total units to be accounted for is also 20,000. Now, since this is the initial month, the work in process account has no beginning balance, okay? So we cannot see there, technically, there's no work in process account. Since this is our initial month, so by default, we don't have any balance or beginning balance for our work in process account. So at this stage, the units to be accounted for will only be those units that are started during the month. And the units to be accounted for in its second month, in its initial department, is shown here. So the total units to be accounted for, as you can see, we have there work in process beginning amounting to 5,000. We also have started in process, which is all the same, 20,000. So total units to be accounted for is 25,000. Now, as what you can see, there is already a work in process beginning because this is the company's second month of operations. So the work in process beginning represents those units that were not finished last month. So this is the company's work in process end last month, which would be the work in process beginning this month. This format will be observed and used in the subsequent months of the company's operation. So the units to be accounted for in its initial month and in its second department is shown right there. So as you can see, the received from prior department, we have 18,000, and therefore the total units to be accounted for is also 18,000. Now this is comparable to the first illustration on the initial month of initial department, wherein there is no work in process beginning. Just like with the initial department, this department will bear no work in process beginning in its initial month, and the units to be accounted for the second department in its second month is shown right there. Now, as you can notice, we already have work in process beginning amounting to 4,000, plus the received from prior department amounting to 18,000, and therefore our total units to be accounted for is amounting to 22,000. So just like in the presentation of the first department, this department will now have a work in process beginning for the second month of the company's operation. So these units represent those that are not yet finished last month and are shown in the work in process end. Now, the work in process end last month will automatically become the work in process beginning of the second month. Okay, so the next thing that we're gonna be discussing, that would be the units as accounted for. So whenever there is a work in process beginning or none, the presentation of the units as accounted for is dependent on the method of cost accumulation being applied by the company. So these methods are the weighted average method, and second, we have the FIFO method, or first in, first out method. Now, in order for us to better understand this, let me show you an example. Now, those without work in process beginning in the first department, the presentation will be as follows. So the units as accounted for, as you can see, you have there transferred to next department amounting to 15,000, plus the work in process ending, you have 5,000, and therefore the total units as accounted for is amounting to 20,000. And take note that units transferred to the next department are the same as completed and transferred to the next department. This presentation can also be used for those with beginning work in process using the weighted average method. And for the FIFO method, as you can see on the below example, transferred to the next department is composed of work in process beginning amounting to 2,000. You also have started and completed amounting to 13,000. And it will be added by work in process ending amounting to 5,000. And therefore, the total units as accounted for, that would be equal to 20,000. All right. And the next key area that we're going to be discussing right now, that would be equivalent units. So what is meant by equivalent units? If we say equivalent units, these are the amount of resources that are required to complete 1 unit of a product. For example, if there are 4 units in the process and all are 25% complete, then the equivalent units will be 1 unit. So these units are hypothetical units rather than physical units, which are referred to as equivalent units. So in the subsequent illustrations, the first part of the cost of production report will be presented as the quantity schedule. So as you can see, first we have the computation of equivalent units when there is no work in process beginning. So for example, the following selected information were taken from the records of Malabanan Manufacturing Company for the period ending December 31st, 2004. So as you can see there, you have started in process 100,000 units. We also have started and completed amounting to 80,000 units. And we also have work in process ending, which is 30% complete. All in all, we have 20,000 units. So illustration number 1. So for illustration number 1, this refers to even application of the cost elements. Now, assuming materials and conversion costs are evenly distributed throughout the production operation, work in process ending is 30% complete as to materials and conversion costs. Now, as you can see, in figure 7.8, this refers to the example of the computation of equivalent units using the even application of cost elements. Now, in this illustration, it is based on the premise that the materials, labor, and factory overhead are applied evenly throughout the process. This is the reason why materials and conversion costs for the work in process ending receive the same percentage of work done. Okay, as you can see, work in process ending that is 30% complete is the same with work in process is 30% completed and work in process 70% incompleted. Just take it over. And illustration number 2, as you can see, this is an even application of cost elements. Now, assuming materials are added at the start of the processes. Now, work in process ending is 30% complete as the conversion costs. Now, as you can see on figure 7.9, this is an example of the computation of equivalent units using the uneven application of the cost elements where materials are added at the start of the process. Now, as you can notice, since materials are added at the start of the process, it is assumed that work in process ending is already 100% complete, right? Conversion cost is only 30% complete. Conversion cost means actual 20,000 multiplied by work done 30%, and the result will be equivalent units of 6,000 units. And on the other hand, for illustration number 3, this refers to uneven application of the cost element. So assuming materials are added at the end of the process, work in process ending is 30% complete. Now, as you can see in figure 7.10, this shows an example of the computation of equivalent units using an even application of cost elements where materials are added at the end of the process. Now, figure 7.10 is based on the premise that the materials are added at the end of the process. Since the conversion cost percentage of completion of work in process ending is only 30%, this means that the materials are not yet introduced because the materials will only be added at the end of the process. And for this reason, the materials work in process ending received a 0% of work done for equivalent units. And for illustration number 4, this refers to an even application at a certain percentage of the process. So assuming materials are added at 20% of the process, work in process ending is 30% complete. Now, as you can see in figure 7.11, this shows an example of the computation of equivalent units using an even application of cost elements where materials are added at certain percentage of the process. Now, figure 7.11, as you can see, is based on the premise that the materials are added at 20% of the process. Since the conversion cost percentage of the completion of work in process ending is only 30%, this means that the materials are already introduced. And this is the reason why materials received 100% work done. Okay? And finally, in illustration number 5, this refers an even application at a certain percentage of a process. So assuming materials are added at 40% of the process, work in process ending is 30% complete as to conversion. Now, as you can see in figure 7.12, this shows us an example of the computation of equivalent units where materials are added with variations with the conversion cost percentage of performance. Now, figure 7.12, as you can notice, is based on the premise that the materials are added at 40% of the process. Now, since the conversion cost percentage of completion of work in process ending is only 30%, this means that the materials are not yet introduced. And this is the reason why the materials received a 0% in the work done for equivalent units. Now, in order for us to better understand this, let me show you an example of computation of equivalent units when there is work in process beginning. So, for example, the following selected information were taken from the records of Malabanan Manufacturing Company for the period ending 31st of December 2004. As you can see, we have there work in process beginning, which is 60% complete, amounting to 20,000 units. We also have started in process, 100,000 units, started and completed, which is 80,000 units, and work in process ending, which is 30% completed, amounting to 20,000 units. Now, the moment that there is a beginning inventory, the presentation of the computation of equivalent units will vary depending on the inventory method used by the company. And these methods are the FIFO, or first in, first out method. And we also have the weighted average method. Now, as you can see on the illustration number 1, or even application, or FIFO, first in, first out, you have there work in process beginning is 60% complete, and work in process ending is 30% complete. Now, as you can see in figure 7.13, this is an example of the computation of equivalent units where there is work in process beginning for FIFO method. And remember that figure 7.13 is based on the premise that the materials, labor, and overhead are applied evenly throughout the process. This is the reason why materials and conversion costs for the work in process ending receive the same percentage of work done. Now, since FIFO is used, it is assumed that the first 20,000 units of the 80,000 finished units comes from the work in process beginning. 60% finished during the last period, and therefore, in this period, only the remaining 40% is incurred, and thus materials and conversion costs receive the 40% work done. And work in process ending is already 30% complete, so materials and conversion costs received a 30% work done. Okay, this is all about illustration number 1. On the other hand, we also have illustration number 2, or the even application, applying weighted average method. Now, as you can see, assuming work in process beginning is 60% complete and work in process ending is 30% complete. Now, as you can see in figure 7.14, this is an example of the computation where there is working in process beginning using weighted average method. Now, it can be observed that in using weighted average method, the work in process beginning was not recognized, unlike in the FIFO method. And finally, you have illustration number 3. And illustration number 3 is all about the uneven application applying FIFO method, wherein materials are added at the start of the processes. Now, as you can see there, you have there work in process beginning is 60% complete. As to conversion, and work in process ending is 30% complete. And as you can see in figure 7.15, this is an example of the computation of equivalent units in comparative format FIFO versus the weighted average. All right, so finally, the last key area that I'm going to be discussing right now, that would be part 2, increases in the number of units due to addition of materials. Now, there are manufacturing companies where the total number of units being manufactured will increase due to the addition of materials in a specific department. Examples of this type of manufacturing companies are soft drinks manufacturing company, and we also have paint manufacturing company. So in soft drinks manufacturing company, in the earlier department, only the syrup is being manufactured. And when this syrup is transferred to the next department, the carbonated water will be added. And with the addition of the carbonated water in the product, the total number of units which the company will produce will increase. So what would be the effect of this increase in the number of units in the quantity schedule? Now, for example, the mixing department of Grand Lake House Manufacturing Company has work in process beginning of 500 gallons, which were 70% complete as to conversion, and received from the prior department or PD 2,000 gallons. As a mixing department, it adds materials, and therefore units increase by 5,000 gallons. And at the end of the month, there are 2,500 gallons left unfinished, which are 40% complete. Now, the quantity schedule will be shown right there. So as you can see on figure 7.16, this is an example of computation of equivalent units with increased units using weighted average. Now, figure 7.16 is based on the premise that the company is using the weighted average method, and the presentation of the quantity schedule will be different if the company is using a FIFO method. So this is an example of the computation. As you can see on figure 7.17, this is a computation of equivalent units with increased units using the FIFO method, or first in, first out. Now, this chapter has many illustrations on various circumstances where possible complexity of academic problems on quantity schedule might arise. Now, as learners, one should have built a sound knowledge on the construction of the quantity schedule so that Whatever information and requirement an academic problem is given, it would be more easier to solve because one already has the skills. Now, if in case you still encounter more problems in preparing a quantity schedule, then you have to go over again this chapter to strengthen more your skill. But should you already have enough confidence on your learning, then you can now proceed to the next topic for this chapter, which is the cost schedule. All right, I think that's a good place to stop. If you have questions, please let me know in the comment section below. And if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button for the latest updates. Thank you.